On the quiet, tree-lined roads of Long Island's North Shore stands a mansion so grand it feels transplanted from the English countryside. Limestone facades, sweeping staircases and manicured gardens stretching toward the horizon. It is called Winfield Hall, and at first glance, it looks like a symbol of permanence. But behind its elegance lies a darker truth, a fortune built on pennies, a family fractured by wealth, and a dynasty that would slowly unravel. This is not just the story of a house. It is the story of how extreme success can cast an even longer shadow. The man who built Winfield Hall was not born into aristocracy. Frank Winfield Woolworth began as a farm boy in upstate New York. In the late 19th century, he revolutionized American shopping by introducing the five and dime store, a simple but radical idea where customers could purchase goods at fixed, affordable prices. At a time when most merchants bargained behind counters, Woolworth placed items openly on display, inviting everyday Americans to browse freely. The concept transformed retail. By the early 1900s, his F.W. Woolworth Company operated hundreds of stores across the United States and abroad, generating a fortune so vast that it placed him among the richest men in the world. Yet Woolworth carried a quiet insecurity. Despite his financial dominance, he was never fully embraced by the old money elite who measured status not just by wealth but by lineage. Industrial titans of the Gilded Age often sought validation through architecture, and Woolworth was no exception. In 1916, at the height of his power, he commissioned Winfield Hall in Glen Cove, New York, an estate designed to rival European country houses. The message was unmistakable. The king of five and dime retail had arrived among America's aristocracy. The mansion itself was staggering in scale. With more than 50 rooms, ornate interiors, imported stone, and expansive formal gardens, it was built not merely as a residence but as a statement. Every carved detail whispered permanence. Every corridor suggested dynasty. It was meant to anchor the Woolworth name in history long after the storefront signs faded. But there is a quiet irony embedded in its foundation. Woolworth made his fortune selling inexpensive goods to working-class Americans. His empire thrived on accessibility. Yet Winfield Hall represented exclusivity, a retreat far removed from the customers who built his wealth. The contrast is striking. A merchant of modest prices constructing one of the most expensive private homes in America. When the mansion was completed, it appeared to symbolize triumph. Yet beneath the limestone walls lingered tension. Woolworth's personal life was strained. His marriage was distant. His health was declining. And though he had built an empire that spanned continents, time was not on his side. Within just a few years of moving into the estate, the man who dreamed it into existence would be gone. Winfield Hall was meant to immortalize a dynasty. Instead, it would become a monument to ambition cut short, and the beginning of a legacy marked not just by wealth, but by tragedy. When construction began on Winfield Hall in 1914, it was clear that this would not be merely another Gilded Age estate, it would be a declaration carved in stone. Rising in Glen Cove on Long Island's North Shore, an area once known as the Gold Coast, the mansion was designed to rival the stately homes of English nobility. Its creator, Frank Winfield Woolworth, had already reshaped American retail with his five and dime empire. But architecture offered something commerce could not, the illusion of aristocracy. To bring that illusion to life, he turned to architect C.P.H. Gilbert, a master of Beaux-Arts and Neo-Georgian design, who had built grand residences for some of America's wealthiest families. Together, they envisioned a limestone palace that would not simply house a family, but enshrine a legacy. The inspiration for Winfield Hall drew heavily from English country estates, particularly those of the Georgian era. Woolworth admired the symmetry, restraint, and inherited dignity of Britain's landed elite, and he wanted that aesthetic transplanted onto American soil. The result was a stately facade of pale limestone, perfectly balanced windows, and classical detailing that suggested lineage even where none existed. From a distance, the mansion appeared centuries old, as if it had always belonged to the landscape. But its construction was a feat of modern engineering. executed with the full power of early 20th century wealth behind it. Inside, the scale was staggering. The mansion contained more than 50 rooms, including a grand entrance hall dominated by a sweeping staircase, elaborate salons for entertaining, a paneled library, and formal dining rooms designed for glittering soirees. Ornamental plaster ceilings, marble fireplaces, imported wood paneling, and crystal chandeliers filled the interiors with controlled opulence. Every element was curated to project refinement rather than excess, but the cost told a different story. Estimates placed the construction and furnishing expenses in the millions of dollars, an astronomical figure at the time. Woolworth, who had once counted pennies in a rural store, now spared no expense in pursuit of permanence. The estate extended far beyond the main residence. Formal gardens unfolded across manicured lawns, reflecting the influence of European landscape design. Tree-lined drives shielded the property from public view, reinforcing its exclusivity. Greenhouses supported exotic plant collections. Staff quarters and service areas operated discreetly behind the scenes, ensuring that the illusion of effortless grandeur remained intact. Winfield Hall was not simply a home. It was a self-contained world, structured to support a lifestyle of aristocratic leisure. And yet, beneath the beauty lay a quiet contradiction. Woolworth's fortune had been built on accessibility. His stores thrived because they welcomed ordinary Americans, offering affordable goods at fixed prices. The democratic spirit of retail innovation contrasted sharply with the aristocratic symbolism of his mansion. In constructing Winfield Hall, he was not celebrating the masses who made him rich. He was seeking validation from an elite circle that often regarded industrial wealth with skepticism. The mansion, in many ways, was an answer to an unspoken question. Could new money purchase old-world legitimacy? Construction continued through the turmoil of World War I, a time when global instability made such lavish spending appear almost defiant. Materials were sourced carefully, craftsmanship prioritized. Gilbert ensured that the house's proportions reflected classical harmony rather than flamboyant display. The effect was subtle but intentional. Winfield Hall would not scream for attention. It would command it quietly. Visitors arriving at the porte-cochere would encounter a residence that felt both imposing and controlled, a balance between American ambition and European tradition. By 1916, the estate was completed. It stood as one of the grandest private homes on Long Island, rivaling neighboring properties owned by industrial magnates and financiers. The Woolworth name, once associated primarily with bustling storefronts, was now anchored to limestone and landscaped acres. The king of five-and-dime retail had built himself a throne. But even as the final details were installed and the gardens matured, time was already shifting beneath the surface. The world was changing rapidly. The war had reshaped economies and social attitudes. The old certainties of the Gilded Age were beginning to erode. Winfield Hall was constructed to suggest endurance, yet it entered a century defined by transformation. There is a haunting quality to buildings erected at the peak of confidence. They embody a belief in stability that history rarely sustains. Winfield Hall was conceived as a family seat, a place where generations of Woolworth descendants would gather, celebrate, and preserve their place among America's elite. But the mansion's grandeur could not guarantee unity, nor could it protect against the fragility of human relationships. As the limestone walls settled into their foundations and the chandeliers cast their first light across polished floors, the mansion appeared invincible. It was the culmination of one man's extraordinary rise from modest beginnings to immense power. Yet within only a few short years, the dream of dynastic permanence would be tested in ways its builder could not foresee. Winfield Hall stood ready to host a legacy, but destiny had other plans. By the time Winfield Hall was completed in 1916, its limestone facade suggested stability, lineage, and control. But inside the mansion's carefully proportioned rooms, the Woolworth family was already fractured. The grandeur of the estate could not conceal the emotional distance that had grown between Frank Winfield Woolworth and his wife, Jennie Mae Woolworth. Their marriage, once rooted in modest beginnings, had long struggled under the weight of immense wealth and social transformation. As Woolworth's fortune expanded, so too did the expectations, pressures, and insecurities that came with it. Winfield Hall was built as a symbol of arrival, but emotionally, the family it was meant to anchor was drifting apart. Frank Woolworth was, by many accounts, disciplined, reserved, and deeply focused on business. His empire required constant oversight, and his attention was often divided between corporate expansion and maintaining his reputation among America's elite. Jenny, on the other hand, found herself navigating a world of social obligations that had not existed in their earlier years. The couple's transition from modest life to international prominence created subtle but persistent strain. Wealth did not simplify their relationship. It complicated it. Expectations multiplied. Appearances mattered. Every gathering at Winfield Hall required orchestration. Every public appearance measured against the standards of high society. The mansion itself became a stage for these tensions. Its formal salons and expansive dining rooms were designed for entertaining, yet intimacy felt scarce within walls built to impress. Servants moved quietly through corridors, maintaining the illusion of seamless luxury. Guests admired the architecture, the gardens, the grandeur, but beneath the spectacle lingered isolation. The very scale that made Winfield Hall magnificent also made it impersonal. Rooms stretched wide, ceilings soared high, and yet the emotional atmosphere within them often felt restrained. Woolworth's daughters grew up in this environment of privilege and pressure. Raised amid extraordinary wealth, they were shielded from financial hardship, but exposed to relentless social scrutiny. Expectations for their marriages, behavior, and public image were shaped not just by family standards, but by the gaze of society eager to judge new money aristocracy. The burden of representing a retail empire weighed heavily on them. Wealth provided access, but it also demanded performance. The contrast between public triumph and private strain became more pronounced as Woolworth's health declined. By the late 1910s, he suffered from chronic illness, compounded by the stress of managing a vast corporate network. The man who had once overseen every detail of his expanding five and dime empire now faced physical limitations that even immense wealth could not overcome. Winfield Hall, intended as a refuge and symbol of permanence, instead became a quiet witness to vulnerability. The grandeur that had been designed to immortalize success now framed scenes of uncertainty. Jenny Woolworth increasingly distanced herself from her husband, both emotionally and physically. Their marriage had deteriorated to a point where coexistence felt more formal than affectionate. Social obligations continued, but warmth was absent. In a mansion built to echo the stability of European country estates, the family dynamic resembled something far less secure. The limestone exterior concealed fragility. This tension extended beyond the immediate household. The Woolworth fortune, though vast, carried implications for future generations. The inheritance structure promised enormous wealth to descendants, including Frank's granddaughter, Barbara Hutton, who would later become one of the richest women in the world. Yet the inheritance also meant exposure to public fascination, to opportunists, to relentless expectation. Even before her dramatic adulthood unfolded, the seeds of pressure were planted within the environment of excess that Winfield Hall represented. There is a particular loneliness that often accompanies extraordinary wealth. The larger the estate, the more difficult it can be to discern genuine connection from obligation. Winfield Hall embodied this paradox. Its construction suggested permanence and unity, but its corridors echoed with emotional distance. The house was filled with art, imported materials, and architectural precision, yet it struggled to contain familial harmony. As World War I reshaped global politics and American society evolved, the Woolworth family faced its own internal reckoning. Frank Woolworth had achieved a transformation rare in American history, from farm boy to international magnate. But success in commerce did not guarantee stability at home. Winfield Hall stood complete, immaculate, and imposing. It projected the image of a dynasty secure in its position. Yet within just a few years of its completion, the man who dreamed it into existence would be gone. The mansion had been constructed to unify and legitimize the Woolworth name among America's elite. Instead, it would soon become a silent monument to ambition shadowed by personal fracture. The limestone walls held firm against wind and weather, but they could not shield the family from the quiet unraveling that wealth had accelerated rather than prevented. In that contradiction lies the beginning of Winfield Hall's darker legacy, not scandal or superstition, but the realization that even the grandest palaces cannot mend what ambition has strained. Long before the gates of Winfield Hall rusted and its grand salons fell silent, the mansion stood as a monument to a fortune built on five and dime counters and the relentless ambition of one man, Frank Winfield Woolworth. By the time construction began in 1915 on the estate in Glen Cove, Long Island, Woolworth was already a titan of American commerce. The founder of the F. Woolworth Company and the mastermind behind a retail empire that had transformed the way ordinary Americans shopped. His stores, bright, accessible, and famously affordable, had made him one of the richest men in the world. Yet, as his fortune soared, so too did his desire for permanence, prestige, and a place among the old money elite who had long looked down upon new money merchants. Winfield Hall would be his answer. Designed by the renowned architectural firm C.P.H. Gilbert, the mansion was conceived not merely as a residence but as a statement. Its French Renaissance style echoed the chateau of the Loire Valley, signaling that the Woolworth name deserved to stand beside the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, and the Astors. Set on more than 40 acres in Glen Cove, then a playground for America's wealthiest families, Winfield Hall rose with limestone facades, soaring columns and interiors drenched in marble, silk, and gold leaf. The grand staircase alone was a theatrical masterpiece, curving upward beneath a painted ceiling as if inviting guests to ascend into another world. This was not a home built for quiet domestic life. It was built for spectacle. But beneath the glittering chandeliers and gilded moldings, there was a tension that would haunt the estate from its earliest days. Woolworth, for all his wealth, was known to be frugal in private life, a man who scrutinized expenses even as he commissioned opulence on an unimaginable scale. His daughter, Helena Woolworth McCann, for whom the mansion was ultimately intended, embodied a different spirit, one drawn to society, glamour, and the intoxicating freedoms of the jazz age. Winfield Hall thus became more than a family residence. It became a stage upon which generational differences and shifting values would quietly unfold. The mansion was completed in 1917, but Frank Woolworth would not enjoy it for long. He died in 1919, only 2 years after its completion, leaving behind not only a colossal retail empire, but also a family unprepared for the burdens that immense wealth can bring. Helena inherited Winfield Hall, and with it, the expectations of a dynasty still in its infancy. The estate hosted lavish parties, glittering gatherings of Long Island's elite, and evenings filled with orchestras and champagne. Yet, even in those golden years, the cracks were forming. The very scale that made Winfield Hall magnificent also made it fragile. Its maintenance costs were staggering, its social relevance dependent on a world that was already beginning to change. The Gilded Age had faded. The Roaring Twenties would give way to the Great Depression. Old certainties were dissolving, and fortunes once thought untouchable were proving vulnerable. As America shifted, so too did the fate of estates like this one. In the decades that followed, Winfield Hall would witness divorces, financial strain, neglect, and periods of abandonment. Its grand rooms would fall silent, its gardens overgrown, its marble floors gathering dust where once silk gowns had swept. The mansion that symbolized triumph would become a symbol of excess and eventually of decay. Today, its story is not merely about architecture or wealth, but about the fleeting nature of power and the illusion that grandeur can secure legacy. This is the dark history of Winfield Hall, a palace built on ambition, inherited by heirs who could not sustain its glory, and left to stand as a haunting reminder that even the grandest dreams can crumble when fortune, family, and time collide. By the time the 1930s gave way to the uneasy optimism of the post-war era, Winfield Hall was no longer simply a symbol of inherited grandeur. It had become a financial burden too heavy for even the Woolworth heirs to comfortably sustain. The fortune that Frank Winfield Woolworth had built through relentless discipline and mass-market genius was still vast. But the cultural landscape that once celebrated colossal private estates was shifting rapidly. The Great Depression had permanently altered public attitudes toward extreme wealth, and the very visibility of such opulence now invited scrutiny rather than admiration. For Helena Woolworth McCann and her family, Winfield Hall was both inheritance and obligation, a palace whose scale demanded constant attention, staff, and capital. The marble staircases, the imported paneling, the sweeping lawns designed for society pageantry, all required resources that no longer flowed as effortlessly as they once had. As the decades progressed, the social rhythm that had once animated the mansion slowed to a near halt. The era of grand balls and orchestras drifting through open French doors had passed. The younger generation of wealthy Americans increasingly preferred Manhattan penthouses or more discreet suburban homes, practical in size and easier to manage. Long Island's Gold Coast, once glittering with Vanderbilt and Morgan estates, began to thin as properties were subdivided, demolished, or sold off in parcels. Winfield Hall stood among these fading giants, its limestone facade a reminder of a time when American ambition expressed itself in stone and symmetry. Yet stone, for all its solidity, cannot defend against economic reality. Maintenance costs grew relentless. Heating a structure of such scale through harsh northeastern winters was itself a small fortune. Roof repairs, facade preservation, interior restoration, each expense compounded the next. The estate required not just caretakers, but specialists, craftsmen capable of restoring hand-carved woodwork, conservators for delicate plaster ceilings, landscapers to tame sprawling grounds designed in an entirely different era. The financial strain was not sudden but cumulative, creeping year by year until the property felt less like a home and more like an anchor. For heirs who had not built the empire themselves, the emotional attachment to the mansion was weaker than the practical burden it imposed. Compounding these pressures were the personal upheavals within the family. The Woolworth legacy, like many dynasties born in the Gilded Age, struggled with the paradox of inherited wealth, prosperity without purpose. Marriages faltered under public scrutiny and private dissatisfaction. Divorces carried not only emotional costs, but legal and financial complications that further fragmented the estate's security. Each division of assets chipped away at the unified vision Frank Woolworth had once held. What had begun as a singular statement of triumph became entangled in the complexities of modern inheritance and shifting loyalties. As the mid-20th century advanced, the mansion experienced periods of reduced occupancy, its vast rooms echoing with absence rather than conversation. Staff numbers dwindled. Certain wings were closed off to conserve resources, leaving entire corridors dark and unused. Dust gathered on chandeliers that had once refracted candlelight during elaborate dinners. The grand ballroom, designed to host hundreds, stood quiet, its polished floors reflecting only sunlight filtered through aging windows. Time, indifferent and patient, began its slow reclamation. The broader Woolworth empire itself was also undergoing transformation. The retail model that had once revolutionized shopping faced increasing competition and cultural change. Though the company endured for decades, it no longer represented the cutting edge of American commerce. The symbolic power of the Woolworth name softened, and with it, the justification for maintaining a residence that embodied peak Gilded Age excess. In a nation accelerating toward modernity, toward highways, television, and corporate skyscrapers, the ornate grandeur of Winfield Hall seemed almost anachronistic, a relic of a more theatrical age. Eventually, the conversation shifted from preservation to divestment. Selling such a property, however, proved complicated. The market for ultra-large historic estates was limited, and potential buyers faced the same daunting maintenance realities. Developers saw opportunity not in the mansion itself, but in the land beneath it. Subdivision offered practicality. Preservation required passion and deep pockets. The very features that made Winfield Hall magnificent, its size, its craftsmanship, its historical specificity, made it commercially impractical in a different economic climate. Throughout these transitions, the mansion's identity evolved from private residence to contested artifact. Preservationists argued for its architectural significance, pointing to the work of C.P.H. Gilbert and the estate's place within the broader narrative of Long Island's Gold Coast. Yet advocacy could not erase the financial arithmetic. Ownership changed hands, and with each transfer came new intentions, some sincere in their desire to restore, others motivated by speculative ambition. Promises of revival surfaced periodically, accompanied by temporary bursts of renovation, only to falter when costs outpaced enthusiasm. In this gradual decline lay the darker truth of Winfield Hall's history. Its fragility was embedded from the beginning. It had been built to project permanence, yet it relied entirely on continuous wealth and cohesive family stewardship to survive. When those pillars weakened, the illusion of immortality collapsed. The estate became less a monument to success and more a cautionary tale about scale untethered from sustainability. Its empty rooms whispered not of triumph, but of transition, a reminder that even the grandest architectural statements are subject to economic tides and human frailty. By the latter half of the 20th century, Winfield Hall no longer represented the future of American aristocracy. Instead, it stood as a vestige of ambition that outpaced practicality, a limestone testament to the belief that fortune could be translated into permanence. The heirs had inherited not only wealth, but a structure whose upkeep demanded a level of cohesion and commitment that proved increasingly elusive. In that tension between legacy and liability, the mansion's fate was quietly sealed. It would endure, but never again as it had once lived, its glory forever tethered to a vanished era. Its survival dependent on forces far beyond the intentions of the family that first called it home. As ownership of Winfield Hall shifted in the latter decades of the 20th century, the mansion entered one of the most uncertain chapters in its history, a period defined not by glittering society galas or dynastic ambition, but by speculation, ambition of a different kind, and a creeping sense of abandonment. What had once been conceived by Frank Winfield Woolworth as a monument to a rival was now an artifact in search of purpose. The Gold Coast of Long Island had long since lost its cohesive identity as an enclave of industrial barons. Many neighboring estates had been demolished, their lands carved into suburban developments. Against that backdrop, Winfield Hall's survival felt almost accidental, its limestone facade standing defiant amid a landscape transformed by modern real estate pressures. New owners approached the property with varying visions. Some saw in its grand staircase and French Renaissance detailing an opportunity for restoration, imagining the revival of a lost era. Others viewed the mansion primarily as acreage, valuable not for its ornate ceilings or carved woodwork, but for its potential to be subdivided. The challenge was always the same. Winfield Hall was simply too large, too elaborate, too expensive to maintain without either extraordinary wealth or a compelling new function. Private residence alone rarely justified the staggering costs. Heating bills, insurance, security, roof repairs, and the constant battle against moisture and decay mounted relentlessly. Unlike modest historic homes, which could be maintained incrementally, this was an estate that demanded continuous, comprehensive care. There were moments of attempted rejuvenation. Renovation crews occasionally returned life to dormant rooms, polishing marble floors and restoring plasterwork that had begun to crack. Photographs from these efforts revealed glimpses of the mansion's original splendor, its sweeping ballroom, the intricate moldings, the towering windows that once framed manicured lawns. Yet restoration on such a scale was never linear. Progress would stall when funds tightened, leaving certain wings partially repaired while others remained untouched. The result was a patchwork of preservation and neglect, beauty and deterioration, coexisting uneasily under the same roof. Meanwhile, the cultural imagination began to reinterpret estates like Winfield Hall. Rather than symbols of contemporary prestige, they became cinematic backdrops, atmospheric relics that evoked mystery and decadence. The mansion's dramatic architecture attracted interest from film and television productions seeking authenticity that modern sets could not replicate. For brief periods, the property was animated once more by lighting rigs, camera crews, and actors moving through its corridors. The irony was striking. A home built to assert social legitimacy was now valued for its ability to portray fictional grandeur on screen. In these moments, Winfield Hall regained a pulse, though it was a borrowed one, dependent on scripts rather than lived experience. Yet beneath these intermittent revivals lingered deeper structural concerns. Decades of fluctuating occupancy had taken their toll. Water infiltration is the silent enemy of old estates, and even minor leaks, left unchecked, can compromise ceilings, woodwork, and foundations. Grounds that once required armies of gardeners gradually surrendered to overgrowth. Trees matured unchecked, roots pushing against pathways designed with geometric precision. The symmetry that had defined the estate's original landscape blurred into something wilder, less controlled. Nature, patient and impartial, began to reclaim what human ambition had imposed. Financial complications further complicated the narrative. Real estate taxes on such expansive property were substantial, and when combined with renovation costs, they placed enormous pressure on owners. At times, legal disputes and liens shadowed the estate's trajectory, casting uncertainty over its long-term stability. Each transition of ownership raised fresh questions. Would this be the steward capable of ensuring preservation, or merely another chapter in an ongoing cycle of aspiration and retreat? The mansion's identity seemed suspended between artifact and asset. Heritage and liability. The broader economic environment also played its part. Market fluctuations influenced not only property values but the availability of capital for restoration. During economic downturns, interest in lavish historic estates waned. During booms, speculative enthusiasm returned. Yet, even in prosperous periods, the niche appeal of such properties limited the pool of committed buyers. Winfield Hall required not simply wealth, but a particular temperament, someone willing to embrace the burdens of history along with its aesthetic rewards. Throughout this era, the memory of Helena Woolworth McCann and the early Woolworth presence faded into distant context. The mansion's story detached from the intimate dynamics of the family that once animated it, and became instead a broader meditation on American wealth itself. It stood as a physical testament to the volatility of fortune, how quickly commercial dominance can translate into architectural ambition, and how slowly that architecture can unravel when its economic foundation shifts. The limestone walls remained sturdy, but permanence in stone could not guarantee permanence in relevance. In quieter moments, observers walking the grounds described an uncanny atmosphere, not supernatural but historical. Empty rooms amplify imagination. The grand staircase, once ascended by guests in silk gowns and tuxedos, now bore the weight of dust motes suspended in filtered sunlight. Echoes replaced conversation. The mansion's silence felt less like peace and more like suspension, as though waiting for a definitive verdict on its future. Would it be meticulously restored, adapted for institutional use, or ultimately sacrificed to redevelopment pressures? The question lingered unresolved. Section 6, then, is defined by liminality. Winfield Hall neither fully collapsed nor fully revived. It hovered in between, emblematic of a broader American reckoning with the legacies of extreme wealth. Its challenges were not dramatic explosions of scandal but the quieter erosion of time, economics, and shifting cultural values. What had begun as a declaration of arrival had become an endurance test. The mansion survived, but survival alone was not triumph. It existed in a delicate balance, its fate contingent on decisions made far from the grand staircase that once symbolized ascent. In that tension between preservation and practicality, the deeper fragility of old money monuments revealed itself with unmistakable clarity. By the early years of the 21st century, Winfield Hall had become less a residence and more a question mark looming over Long Island's Gold Coast, a monumental structure suspended between resurrection and irreversible decline. Time had not toppled its limestone facade, nor had storms reduced its grand staircase to rubble. Yet a different kind of erosion was at work: legal, financial, and psychological. The mansion's scale, once its greatest triumph, now functioned as a constant reminder of how disproportionate its existence was in a world that no longer produced fortunes in the style of Frank Winfield Woolworth. His empire had been built on nickels and dimes collected from millions of customers, a democratic foundation for an aristocratic dream. But in the new century, the idea of maintaining a 40-room French Renaissance palace as a private home felt increasingly detached from economic reality. Ownership transitions during this era were marked by ambition that often exceeded endurance. Prospective buyers arrived with grand restoration plans, speaking confidently about reviving the ballroom, restoring the carved wood paneling, and returning the gardens to their original geometric precision. Architects and contractors surveyed the estate, estimating costs that climbed steadily with each hidden structural issue uncovered. Roof repairs revealed deeper moisture damage. Cracked plaster hinted at compromised supports. Every solution uncovered another layer of expense. Renovating a mansion of this magnitude was not comparable to restoring a townhouse or even a sizable country estate. It was a continuous negotiation with history, requiring specialized craftsmen capable of matching early 20th century artistry. And those skills came at a premium at times. The mansion's future seemed to hinge on courtrooms rather than construction sites. Financial disputes and legal entanglements slowed progress, casting uncertainty over redevelopment or restoration initiatives. Property taxes alone imposed immense pressure, demanding liquidity that renovation projects often consumed. The estate became entangled in the bureaucratic machinery of modern governance, its survival dependent not only on vision but on compliance, zoning regulations, and fiscal discipline. In this environment, Winfield Hall felt almost like an anachronism, struggling to exist within frameworks designed for more practical properties. Yet even in periods of stagnation, the mansion retained a peculiar magnetism. Photographers, historians, and preservationists viewed it as one of the last substantial remnants of the Gold Coast's extravagant age. They saw in its sweeping staircase and marble halls a narrative that extended beyond the Woolworth family, a broader chronicle of American aspiration. Long Island had once been a proving ground for industrial magnates seeking validation among older social elites. Estates like Winfield Hall stood as physical manifestations of that competition, designed to rival European chateaux and proclaim legitimacy. The fact that so many neighboring properties had vanished only intensified the symbolic weight carried by this one survivor. Occasionally, restoration efforts sparked cautious optimism. Sections of the mansion were stabilized, facades cleaned, and interior spaces partially revived. News coverage would briefly spotlight these efforts, framing Winfield Hall as a comeback story poised for Renaissance. But optimism proved fragile. The financial gravity of such a project could not be ignored indefinitely. Restoration budgets ballooned, timelines stretched, and investors reassessed risk. The mansion seemed perpetually on the brink of revival, yet equally perpetually on the verge of setback. It existed in a cycle of anticipation and delay, hope and hesitation. Meanwhile, the surrounding community evolved. Subdivisions replaced former estates, and modern homes rose where once sprawling lawns extended uninterrupted. The contrast between Winfield Hall's monumental presence and the comparatively modest scale of nearby properties underscored its isolation. It no longer belonged to a cohesive enclave of similar grandeur. It stood alone, a relic in a landscape recalibrated for efficiency and accessibility. The social ecosystem that had once supported such estates had dissolved, leaving the mansion culturally unmoored through it all. The ghost of Helena Woolworth McCann lingered not as a spectral presence but as a historical echo. Her inheritance of the estate had symbolized continuity, yet continuity proved elusive across generations. The fragility of dynastic wealth became evident in the mansion's prolonged uncertainty. Unlike commercial buildings that adapt to new purposes with relative ease, Winfield Hall resisted transformation. Its rooms were too grand for ordinary function, its layout too specific to seamlessly convert into modern use without sacrificing authenticity. Every proposal, whether to subdivide, repurpose, or fully restore, carried trade-offs that risked diminishing its historical integrity, In the broader narrative of American wealth, Winfield Hall's trajectory offered a sobering counterpoint to the myth of perpetual ascent. It illustrated how fortunes that once seemed indestructible could disperse, how architectural statements of supremacy could evolve into logistical challenges. The mansion did not collapse dramatically. It endured, which in many ways was more haunting. Its endurance demanded explanation, demanded resources, demanded belief. Without a unifying family vision or institutional patronage, it hovered in a state of suspended animation. Section 7, then, captures a mansion at crossroads. Not yet lost, not fully saved, Winfield Hall embodied the tension between heritage and practicality in a rapidly modernizing society. Its limestone walls absorbed another decade of uncertainty, its marble floors reflecting shifting intentions rather than dancing guests. The grandeur remained undeniable, but grandeur alone could not secure destiny. As the new century advanced, the estate's future rested not on nostalgia, but on whether someone possessed both the means and the resolve to translate admiration into action. Until that moment arrived, Winfield Hall remained a monument not only to a Gilded Age dream, but to the fragile afterlife of that dream in a world that had moved on. As the years moved deeper into the 21st century, Winfield Hall began to symbolize something far larger than the fortunes of a single family. It became a mirror reflecting America's conflicted relationship with wealth, preservation, and legacy. Built by Frank Winfield Woolworth as a declaration that retail success could rival aristocratic lineage, the mansion now stood as a question posed to modern society. What do we do with monuments to excess when the culture that created them has faded? Its limestone facade still carried the dignity of French Renaissance ambition. But behind those walls lingered the quiet evidence of deferred decisions, halted projects and a grandeur waiting for direction. By this stage, restoration efforts had grown increasingly complex. The estate's systems, electrical, plumbing, heating, were antiquated by contemporary standards. Upgrading them without compromising the architectural integrity required delicate negotiation between innovation and preservation. Specialists were consulted, engineers drafted plans, and contractors offered estimates that often exceeded expectations. Each improvement required precision, because a careless alteration could erase historical authenticity that could never be recovered. The mansion demanded not just investment, but reverence. And reverence, unlike ambition, cannot be forced into existence by money alone. The property's size remained its defining paradox. Its 40 rooms, sweeping staircases, and expansive grounds were the very features that captivated admirers and complicated ownership. In a world increasingly oriented toward efficiency and sustainability, such scale felt almost rebellious. Heating and cooling alone required substantial energy, raising questions about environmental responsibility alongside financial practicality. The estate, conceived during an era when resource consumption signaled prosperity, now faced scrutiny in a time more conscious of ecological limits. Winfield Hall had been designed to impress. It now had to justify its continued existence in a different moral and economic climate. Meanwhile, the narrative of Long Island's Gold Coast had become nostalgic rather than contemporary. The once dominant estates of industrial titans had largely disappeared, their lands subdivided into residential developments or repurposed for institutional use. Winfield Hall's survival felt improbable, almost defiant. Historians and preservation advocates increasingly framed it as one of the last intact embodiments of a social experiment that sought to replicate European aristocracy on American soil. Its architecture, shaped by C.P.H. Gilbert, represented not only aesthetic ambition but cultural aspiration, the desire of newly wealthy Americans to secure legitimacy through stone, symmetry, and spectacle. Public fascination intensified in unexpected ways. Digital media allowed images of the mansion's interiors to circulate widely, capturing global audiences intrigued by abandoned grandeur and forgotten dynasties. Photographs of the grand staircase and ballroom, sometimes restored, sometimes showing subtle decay-fueled conversations, about whether such estates should be preserved as cultural landmarks or allowed to pass into history. The mansion became a subject of online speculation, mythologized in ways that blurred fact and imagination. Yet beneath the romantic lens of photography, the financial arithmetic remained unchanged. Preservation required more than admiration. It required sustained commitment. Ownership challenges persisted, shaped by broader economic currents. Real estate markets fluctuated, investors weighed risk against reward, and each potential transaction carried implications for the mansion's integrity. Proposals ranged from private restoration to redevelopment schemes that threatened to compromise the estate's original footprint. Zoning regulations and community sentiment played subtle but influential roles. Some local voices championed preservation as a matter of heritage. Others questioned whether maintaining such an enormous private structure served contemporary needs. Winfield Hall thus found itself at the intersection of history and practicality. Its future debated not only in boardrooms but within the broader civic imagination. Through it all, the shadow of Helena Woolworth McCann remained part of the estate's layered memory. Her tenure had marked the height of social vibrancy within its walls, when orchestras filled the ballroom and guests ascended the staircase beneath chandeliers glowing with candlelight. That era had long since passed, yet its echoes informed every conversation about restoration. To preserve Winfield Hall was to preserve not merely a building, but a chapter of American aspiration, one defined by audacity, display, and the belief that wealth could translate into permanence. But permanence is a fragile promise. The longer the mansion lingered in limbo, the more evident it became that time was not neutral. Even without catastrophic damage, subtle deterioration accumulates. Exterior stone requires cleaning and sealing. Interior finishes demand climate control. Landscapes need constant stewardship. Delay, no matter how well-intentioned, carries cost. Each postponed decision narrows future options, increasing the resources required for eventual intervention. Section 8 captures Winfield Hall in this delicate equilibrium, neither fully revived nor fully relinquished. It remains standing, its silhouette still commanding against the Long Island skyline, yet its meaning continues to evolve. No longer simply a Woolworth residence, it has become a symbol of transition, from Gilded Age spectacle to modern uncertainty, from private triumph to public debate. Its survival depends not only on capital but on collective will, on whether contemporary society chooses to see in its marble halls a relic of indulgence or a tangible artifact of history worth safeguarding. In the end, Winfield Hall's story is less about decay than about decision. Every generation confronts the question of what to preserve and what to release. For this mansion, built on nickels and dreams, the answer remains unwritten. Its staircase still curves upward in elegant defiance, as though awaiting footsteps that have yet to arrive. Whether those steps signal restoration or farewell will determine whether the estate continues as a living monument or settles into memory as the last grand whisper of a vanished age. By the time Winfield Hall entered its second century, the mansion no longer belonged solely to the legacy of the Woolworth family. It had become a symbol suspended between myth and material reality, a structure carrying the weight of both architectural brilliance and unresolved destiny. Built by Frank Winfield Woolworth at the height of his empire's triumph, the estate was conceived as an enduring testament to success. Yet endurance, as the decades revealed, is not guaranteed by stone alone. The mansion's survival into the modern era was remarkable. But survival without clarity of purpose cast a long shadow over its marble floors and echoing corridors. As restoration discussions continued into recent years, the mansion's condition reflected a complex mixture of preservation and pause. Certain rooms retained their grandeur, their plaster ceilings and carved woodwork carefully stabilized by intermittent conservation efforts. Other areas bore the quiet evidence of time: minor cracks, fading finishes, and the subtle wear that accumulates when maintenance ebbs and flows with financial tides. Unlike ruins overtaken by collapse, Winfield Hall remains structurally imposing, its facade still commanding attention. Yet the emotional atmosphere within its walls felt transitional. as though the building itself were waiting for a final verdict. The economics of such an estate grew increasingly intricate. Modern building codes required updates to infrastructure that early 20th century architects could never have anticipated. Fire safety systems, climate control, electrical rewiring all demanded integration without disturbing historical authenticity. Each upgrade required careful negotiation between preservationists and contractors, balancing safety with aesthetic fidelity. These were not cosmetic enhancements. They were foundational investments necessary to ensure the mansion's viability in the present day. But foundational investments require long-term certainty, and certainty proved elusive. The broader context of American wealth had shifted dramatically since the era when Winfield Hall first opened its doors. Contemporary fortunes often manifested in technology startups, global finance, or discrete real estate portfolios rather than single monumental residences. The culture of display that defined the Gilded Age had softened, replaced by more understudied forms of prestige. In that landscape, the mansion's scale felt almost theatrical, a relic of a time when visibility equated to legitimacy. Its limestone exterior, once a bold declaration of arrival, now read as historical artifact rather than competitive statement. Community perspectives added another layer of complexity. Some local residents regarded the estate with pride, seeing it as a tangible connection to Long Island's storied Gold Coast. Others viewed it through a practical lens, questioning the allocation of resources required to sustain such a vast private property. Debates over preservation versus redevelopment echoed quietly in planning meetings and informal conversations alike. Should Winfield Hall be maintained as a singular monument or adapted to serve broader public or institutional purposes? Each possibility carried implications not only for the building, but for the narrative it represented. Throughout these deliberations, the legacy of Helena Woolworth McCann hovered as both inspiration and caution. Her era had demonstrated how quickly vibrancy could fill the mansion's vast spaces, yet history also showed how swiftly that vibrancy could dissipate when generational focus shifted. The estate's trajectory illustrated a recurring truth of dynastic wealth. Inheritance can preserve assets, but it cannot automatically preserve intention. Without a cohesive vision, even the most magnificent structures risk drifting into ambiguity. There were moments when renewed investment suggested that clarity might finally emerge. Restoration crews returned to specific wings, scaffolding briefly reappeared along exterior walls, and reports circulated of ambitious plans to revive the estate to its former splendor. Hope flickered, carried by the belief that someone possessed both the resources and determination to see the project through. Yet experience had taught observers caution. Grand estates demand not only initial capital but sustained commitment over years, sometimes decades. The difference between aspiration and achievement lies in endurance. Inside the mansion, light still filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced where once chandeliers glittered during society gatherings. The grand staircase, perhaps the most iconic feature of Winfield Hall, remained intact, a sweeping arc of marble that seemed perpetually prepared for guests who never quite arrived. Its symbolism had deepened over time. What once represented ascent into elite society now suggested something more contemplative, a passage between eras, between certainty and doubt. Section 9 reveals Winfield Hall as a structure defined by threshold. It has not succumbed to demolition, nor has it fully reclaimed its role as vibrant residence. Instead, it occupies a liminal space in American architectural history, embodying the unresolved tension between preservation and pragmatism. Its walls continue to stand, a testament to craftsmanship and ambition. Yet the question of long-term purpose remains delicately balanced. In the end, the mansion's fate may depend less on nostalgia than on adaptability. Can a building designed for Gilded Age spectacle find relevance in a century defined by different values? Can its grandeur be reframed not as indulgence but as cultural heritage? These questions extend beyond Winfield Hall itself, touching on how modern society interprets the legacies of extraordinary wealth. For now, the estate endures, neither triumphant nor defeated, but waiting. Its marble staircase still curves upward with quiet confidence, as though reminding all who pass beneath it that history does not vanish. It lingers, demanding decision. Whether that decision secures revival or consigns, the mansion to memory will define the final chapter of this enduring monument to ambition. In the end, the story of Winfield Hall is not defined by a single scandal, catastrophe, or dramatic collapse, but by something far more revealing: the slow unraveling of certainty. What began as an architectural proclamation by Frank Winfield Woolworth, a man who transformed five-and-dime stores into a retail empire, has evolved into a meditation on permanence itself. When Woolworth commissioned the mansion in Glen Cove, he was not simply building a home. He was constructing proof that commercial success could be translated into aristocratic legitimacy. Limestone walls, soaring ceilings, and a grand staircase worthy of European royalty were meant to secure the family name in physical form. Yet, as the decades passed, it became clear that stone can preserve beauty, but it cannot preserve unity, relevance, or purpose. Winfield Hall's endurance into the modern era is remarkable, especially when so many neighboring Gold Coast estates have disappeared beneath subdivisions and redevelopment. Its facade still commands attention. Its symmetry still evokes the confidence of a nation at the height of industrial expansion. Designed by C.P.H. Gilbert, the mansion stands as one of the most substantial surviving examples of early 20th century American opulence. But survival alone is not the same as triumph. The estate's long periods of uncertainty, financial strain, stalled restorations, ownership transitions have revealed the fragile ecosystem required to sustain such grandeur. Over time, the mansion has shifted from private symbol to public question. It no longer represents merely the Woolworth dynasty. It represents an era when wealth was displayed with unapologetic scale. Today, cultural values have shifted. Discretion often replaces ostentation, and fortunes are measured less by physical monuments than by diversified portfolios and digital innovation. Against this backdrop, Winfield Hall appears almost defiant, a limestone reminder of a chapter when visibility equaled validation. Its sweeping staircase still curves upward in theatrical fashion, but the audience has changed. Where once society elites gathered beneath chandeliers, now historians, preservationists, and curious observers contemplate its future. The legacy of Helena Woolworth McCann forms a crucial thread in this final chapter. Her inheritance of the estate symbolized continuity, yet continuity proved more elusive than anticipated. The burdens of maintaining such a colossal property revealed the limits of inherited ambition. Wealth can construct a palace, but sustaining it across generations demands cohesion, discipline, and evolving vision. Without those elements, even the grandest residence becomes vulnerable to inertia. The mansion's quiet corridors testify not to scandal, but to dispersion, the gradual scattering of focus that often accompanies dynastic succession. And yet, despite every obstacle, Winfield Hall has not vanished. Its marble floors still reflect afternoon light. Its exterior, though weathered by seasons, retains the commanding presence intended more than a century ago. Restoration efforts, intermittent but sincere, have demonstrated that revival is possible when resolve aligns with resources. The building remains structurally formidable, its craftsmanship resilient. There is a stubborn dignity in its endurance, a suggestion that perhaps legacy is not solely about uninterrupted prosperity, but about the ability to withstand uncertainty. In a broader sense, the mansion's story mirrors the arc of American capitalism itself. The Gilded Age produced fortunes at breathtaking speed, fortunes that sought physical expression in estates meant to rival European nobility. But capitalism is inherently fluid. Industries rise and fall, markets fluctuate, tastes evolve. The Woolworth empire that funded Winfield Hall thrived in a retail landscape that no longer exists in the same form. As economic models transformed, so too did the cultural appetite for monumental private residences. The mansion thus stands at the intersection of two timelines, one rooted in industrial expansion, the other defined by modern recalibration. What remains unresolved is not the building's past, but its destiny. Will it ultimately be preserved as a rare artifact of Gold Coast ambition, meticulously restored and adapted to contemporary use? Or will it continue to hover in that delicate space between reverence and practicality, sustained but not fully animated? These questions underscore a deeper tension about how society chooses to engage with its symbols of excess. Preservation requires belief that such symbols hold educational or cultural value beyond their original intent. Demolition or subdivision reflects a different philosophy, one prioritizing utility over memory. As the sun sets over Glen Cove, casting long shadows across manicured grounds that once hosted orchestras and lantern-lit gatherings, Winfield Hall appears almost contemplative. It has witnessed the rise of a retail titan, the vibrancy of jazz-age celebrations, the strain of generational transition, and the uncertainty of modern economics. Its walls have absorbed triumph and hesitation alike. And perhaps that is its ultimate significance. The mansion no longer needs to assert dominance. It serves instead as a reminder that even the most confident declarations of permanence are subject to time's quiet negotiation. Section 10 closes not with collapse, but with reflection. Winfield Hall endures not untouched, not untested, but standing. It is a monument to ambition and a cautionary tale about sustainability, a palace that survived its era and now awaits a new definition. Whether it will re-emerge as a restored masterpiece or remain a dignified relic depends on choices yet to be made. But one truth is already clear. The grandeur of Winfield Hall was never solely about wealth. It was about the human desire to be remembered. And in that sense, regardless of its ultimate fate, the mansion has already succeeded.